John Garcia, national recruiting analyst for 247 Sports. He's covered Mack Wilson coming out. John, would you be surprised if I told you NFL.com has got a mock draft with Mack Wilson going to 22 to Pittsburgh? 20 to Pittsburgh, not 22, 20 to Pittsburgh.
I wouldn't be surprised only because I've seen similar. But if you would have told me a month ago that he was a projected top 20 pick, I certainly would have been surprised. Absolutely.
Well, but what does it tell you? Is too much we're reading into this? Because I thought Mack Wilson, to me, I like the young man. I think he's got some potential to be a really stud linebacker. But I thought he played at times this year, as well as a lot of our guys did, confused is the only way I can describe it on that side of the football.
I think it's another sign of where the game's going. I think you look at baseball with the percentages, right, with all the analytics. You look at basketball. The whole culture has shifted with the space game, the three-point shot, the efficiency. So in football, where is it going? It's going more wide open. It's going more towards space and athleticism, maybe valued now more than ever, instead of the guy who can come downhill on 1st and 10 and make it 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 9. That 10, 15, 20 years ago was what we thought of as an inside linebacker. That has changed. Now it's the guy who can occasionally do that, but also who can run down the field, who can drop into zone coverage, who can be an athlete. It's almost like an athlete playing linebacker as opposed to a linebacker playing in space. So
when he led the team in interceptions last year.
Sure. He'll test well. He's a good pass defender within his responsibility. He's a great athlete. I don't think anybody would deny that. Now, how did he execute? How did he call the defense? How did he adjust mentally between the ears? How is he? That remains to be seen. And that's the part of the process the draft hasn't yet gotten to, right? Pro days aren't here. Combines aren't here. Interviews with these players aren't here yet. So I'm very curious to see where it shifts when they do get into those things. Because if there is one thing that we know about the NFL draft, they're as thorough as anyone. Everything is a data point. They ask you the weird questions. They dig as far into your background as possible. I'm curious to see once those evaluations take place, the off-the-field stuff, where does it go with Mack? Does he improve his stock? Does he slide a little bit? That's what I'm very curious about because there's no doubt that there are question marks following this year.
We're talking to John Garcia, national recruiting analyst for 247 Sports, BamaOnline.com. John, you're a guy that's been in this business forever, and I'm just looking at your Twitter image, and you got snow falling. That's not tonight or last night, was it? That was not a photo. That's been a few days, right?
No, but that was at Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Was it really?
Last night. Yeah, that was the state title game. In 2017, we had a snow day, and all the kids just loved it. I mean, it was white snow. The whole field was white at Bryant-Denny. It was first week of December 2017. I got out there to take advantage and get a photo op.
I mean,
it was great.
I mean, snow's like a bad word in Tuscaloosa today because all the kids, were anticipated for snow, and the forecast was not true. But we're talking to John Garcia, 247 Sports. How good is Brian Baker on the recruiting front?
Not only on the recruiting front, but look at what he's developed,
sure,
right, at Mississippi State. And he's done it from all angles. And what I mean by that is that he has fostered 5-stars. When you look at a guy like Jeff Simmons, who has come in as elite as it gets and has maintained as such and is still expected to be a first-rounder. That's what a 5-star is, right? That's what we think at 24/7 Sports a 5-star is. And then on the flip side of that, he takes a guy who played out of position. He was a tight end, signed with another school, went JUCO, a guy named Montez Sweat, turns him into an edge rusher, and all of a sudden, now he's one of the top pass rushers in the NFL draft. So you can get the chalk first rounder, but you still got to get him there. But it's just as impressive, if not more, to get that guy who wasn't always, hey, I'm going to be a pass rusher in the NFL, getting him to the first round of the draft. So I think on field, the development is about as good as it gets. And Alabama's seen it firsthand. Mississippi State's one of the few teams that has somewhat slowed Alabama over the last 2 years. And then on the recruiting trail, look at what Mississippi State has done over the last couple of years. We already mentioned Simmons. In this class alone, they've had 4 or 5 top 100 linemen committed at one point or another, including a 5-star. So I do think that he has the full package as a recruiter, whether it's identification, evaluation, closing the deal, and then developing them thereafter, which is really rare. Most guys are good at one or the other, but not necessarily both, and all indications that he is.
We're talking to John Garcia right now from 247 Sports. John, what do you think this number ends up with? Right now, you got 15 early enrollees, which is a gigantic number. That's even hard to say. 15 early enrollees. You've got 9 commitments right now, according to 247 Sports, BamaOnline.com. What do you think this number ends up with for Alabama's total commitments that will sign their letter of intent to play football at Alabama?
We've always heard 27, 28. Some sources will say, hey, if 5-star X and Y wants to jump in, they can push it to 30. We don't expect it going to 30, but I think the 28 range makes sense. Look, Bama's not going to sign all those guys that are verbally committed. However, they're going to go attack and potentially add guys who aren't committed anywhere at this point or are committed elsewhere at this point. So I do think that there's very much some wiggle room there. There's a couple of uncommitted targets out there as well. So I just think when it all shakes out, 27, 28, maybe stretching to 29, but I don't think it hits 30. I think that would be a bit much. That would be a scenario where I guess, all of the targets at once kind of say, hey, we want in. I think Bama is one of the few schools that could figure it out if it gets to that point, but I don't expect it to get to that point.
Let me take you to Seminary, Mississippi. It's home of Nathan Pickering, and Brian Baker's a guy that may pay off for Alabama. Craig Kuligowski and Pete Golding recruiting here. Brian Baker is going to add to the Alabama staff. Can he flip this young man from Mississippi State to Alabama?
Well, few are as familiar, right? I mean, Nathan Pickering is an in-state kid from Mississippi State, 1 million visits there under his belt. I'm told that on the front end of this past weekend's official visits, which Pickering was in Starkville, Baker was still kind of on his way out. So I wouldn't rule out a little bump into there between the two parties. So obviously familiarity is such a big part in trying to do something big. And flipping an in-state kid like that at the 11th hour, the final weekend of the recruiting cycle, would be that. Now the key here is whether or not Pickering takes this visit. He has long said, and he's told me to my face, hey, if I don't go to Mississippi State, I'm going to Alabama. The last recruit who told me something like that was a guy named Dylan Moses, who said, if I don't go to LSU, I'm going to end up at Alabama. Les Miles was fired, and we all know what played out thereafter. So if Bama can secure this visit, which is tentatively scheduled right now, I do think there's a strong chance Bama can pull off what would be one of the more impressive feats in this 2019 class, which is still number one and going to finish number one. But Pickering has not yet confirmed that he is 100% taking the trip. He does typically say the right things in regards to Mississippi State, so it doesn't surprise me he hasn't said it. But with most recruits like that, we track what they do, sometimes more than what they say. So if Pickering shows up Friday, Saturday, Sunday, game on. If he doesn't, I think Bama's quite fine with the defensive line haul they have right now. And they're still in it for a couple of other guys as well on the trail. So it's a strong D-line class, maybe the best in America. But Pickering, Ishmael Sopsher, guys like that, that would just be icing on the cake.
Henry T., Concord, California. What's the latest?
Bama did good. Shocking, right? Bama did good. He just visited this past weekend. Tennessee was really kind of the flavor of the month with him following the departure of Tosh Lupoy, his primary recruiter, a fellow Concord, California, De La Salle High School product. That was a big blow. There's no doubt about it. But part of the reconciliation here, not only is Nick Saban in the continuity with the coaching staff from the top, but also Charles Kelly, kind of a under-talked about situation with Henry. Knew him well at Tennessee, was part of the reason Tennessee was about to surge for this kid's recruitment, and now obviously he's at Alabama. So I think that was a big deal for Henry Toto, but still remains to be seen, right? Oregon's going to get him on campus this weekend, most likely. It may matter, it may not. We shouldn't underestimate Mario Cristobal. They've got the number one class in the Pac-12, a top 10 class overall, and they've straight up beaten Bama for at least one recruit in this cycle. But we don't expect that here. Henry Toto has always kind of leaned SEC. He wants to make that jump, and Bama's his best opportunity to do so. He is a priority, and he's fresh off the trip, so you got to feel better about it if you're Alabama right now. I actually spoke to a source in Knoxville today about numbers, and they're already not conceding Toto, but let's just say they're they're planning on looking at the numbers without him on an everyday basis. So I think that tells you a lot about still the power of Alabama and the closing ability of Nick Saban.
All right, John, as we know, forecasts in the last 24 hours have not been very kind to Tuscaloosa. As you're looking at this commitment list, early enrollees, hard commitments, soft commitments, the parts that you think will be a part of this signing class, give me a forecast on a guy that you have seen that you think that you cannot go wrong. This guy will forecast to play in 2019 and play a significant role. Is there a guy on this list that you think makes an early impact at Alabama that you say there's no way this guy can go wrong? He makes an impact at Alabama.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go chalk here, and I don't typically do it, but the number one player in the country happens to be a defensive lineman who's already on campus named Antonio Alfano. Happens to be a position of need for Alabama. Raekwon Davis coming back really big for the D-line. LeBron Ray expected to step up into a more permanent role, almost like Quinnen Williams this time last year. Not saying he'll do that, but that was kind of the trajectory there. And then after that, a whole lot of, inexperience on that D-line. So if there's a spot where a guy can come in, he's highly touted, motivated, and one who's impressed at literally every single turn, it's Antonio Alfano, 6'4", 275 or so. Going to gain weight, play about 290 plus, to where he can play that kind of Isaiah Buggs role, right? Hand in the dirt inside, a little bit outside, depending on down and distance, and the playing time's there, right? There's going to have to be a D lineman in this class that plays day one. Doesn't mean he's going to start, doesn't mean he's going to play a ton, and it may take him some time, but he's already on campus. He's already in the program, academically, athletically, all of those things. He's already with Scott Cochran, which was one of the biggest reasons he picked Alabama. Speaking of stability, he's the guy. He's kind of chalk, but he's got the chip on his shoulder. He's from New Jersey. He wants to be the best Bama New Jersey product. And obviously, Minka Fitzpatrick was just in town a couple of years ago. That's a lofty expectation, but the kid legitimately believes he's going to get there one day. It was part of the reason why he graduated early. It's part of the reason why he went to Bama, and part of the reason why he's on campus already. So that's usually the formula for a year one impact guy. Early enrollee, highly coveted, highly motivated. Tony Alfano fits those bills.
College football recruiting analyst, 247 Sports, 247 Sports, Crimson and Blue Chips, the podcast available. You can connect with them, CABC Pod, Crimson and Blue Chips, the free Alabama football and recruiting digital content, the CABC podcast. Check it out, Crimson and Blue Chips, and Crimson and Blue Chips on the podcast page on the Twitter account, BamaOnline.com, 247 Sports, national recruiting analyst. John Garcia, thank you, my friend, for being a part of the show.
Always a pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me.